Okay, I think we're good to go. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. So a huge welcome on behalf of the Forestry Commission. My name is Wali Rahman. I'm the Diversity and Wellbeing Manager here at the Forestry Commission. So thank you all for joining us today on where we'll be discussing the important topic of working across generations, and we have our esteemed speaker here, Steve Butler, who I'll introduce in just a few moments. But before we start, I'd just like to mention a few housekeeping rules. So first of all, know that there are closed captions available or subtitles within the chat should you need them. And you can find these in the options of your Teams app or browser. Please also note that we are recording this session and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel in due course. Please feel free to keep your cameras on. I think if you can, it'd be preferable to keep those on just for engagement. But if you don't want to, that's up to you. That's absolutely fine. And also, please make sure your mics are on mute. I'll now introduce our speaker, Steve Butler. So Steve has over 35 years of experience in financial services, including fintech, pensions, and investment. Steve is a seasoned business leader and entrepreneur who is passionate about helping people maximize their retirement. He is the managing director of Pension Potential, a digital retirement guidance and advice solution that empowers members and employees to make informed decisions about their retirement. Steve is also a chartered companion of the Chartered Management Institute, CMGR CCMI, a prestigious credential that recognizes his outstanding leadership and management skills. He is a prolific writer and speaker on intergenerational working, retirement, and older worker business management issues, and has published several business books. I have two of his books that are relevant to this talk right here. So the Manage the Gap and the Midlife Review. So head over to Amazon after the webinar and get yourself a copy of each. So Steve is committed to developing an inclusive culture in the workplace where people of all ages and backgrounds can thrive and contribute. What brought Steve to our attention was his book on intergenerational workplaces, which I just showed you, called Managing the Gap. And hopefully he'll share some of those insights that are written about in that book and in the Midlife Review as well. And more specifically in this talk, Steve will discuss strategies on how to harness the different skills, experiences, and aspirations of each generation and create a happy and harmonious workplace. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Steve, who will speak for around 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll take questions. So please put your questions in the chat during the talk, and I'll put them to Steve during the Q&A section. And so I'll hand over to you now, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so thank you for inviting me. I'm going to talk about kind of the age ranges across the workplace and kind of how we can kind of make the most of everyone and kind of achieving success with intergenerational teams. I guess a little bit about myself. For the last kind of 8-9 years, I have been running a business of 200 plus staff. So what kind of led me into this area was my own experiences in that organization. We had a very diverse business in terms of age, and that initially presented me with a series of challenges which I had to kind of navigate, and that's what prompted me to then write the Manage the Gap book. I've also recently completed a research degree where I investigated the impact of COVID on the different generations in the workplace, which kind of threw up another series of challenges for me. So I guess if we're going to start talking about age, we need to start with the kind of UK population and what it looks like. This chart, if you've never seen it before, is produced by the Office for National Statistics, and we have the bars representing the number of people at each age. Now, historically, i.e., before the kind of Second World War, this chart was very much a pyramid shape. Life expectancy was shorter, and there was kind of a very sort of structured reduction in the number of people because they were hit by kind of illnesses, etc. Over the last 100 years, improvements in medicine, etc., have meant that people live longer and have changed the shape of this chart. Now, what's interesting here is we've got these bulges. So if you see this point around age 70, this is the end of the Second World War for anyone that's of this age. And there was an immediate baby boom at the end of the Second World War, but that was then followed by the big bulge after that, which is what we refer to the group of individuals called the baby boomers. They were a result of the kind of the release of restrictions, etc., on finances, etc., after the war, and we had the baby boom. And that's the generation now, which is kind of heading into their 60s and 70s. The gap that or the smaller population we see after the baby boom is what's referred to as Generation X, because there was a smaller generation after that boom. And then the next bulge is the generation that we call the millennials, and they are the children of the baby boomers. So that's the reason there's more people, because they were the children of a larger generation. So as you can see from this chart, there's age groups kind of moving through, which has an impact on the workplace, and I shall talk more about that as we go through. But I think the immediate thing to kind of pull out from that chart is, over the current period, we're seeing a massive change in population age groups, because that baby boomer population burst is now kind of moving into the 60 plus age. So we're seeing many more people 65 plus in our society. And that obviously has an impact, because a number of those people aren't working and contributing to kind of tax, etc. And because of the shape of the pyramid that I just showed you, we've also got a reduction in kind of numbers in other age groups. So this is going to put a real strain on the workplace, as you'll see from the second chart there. With less 35 to 49-year-olds, but a big growth in kind of older workers, which is a very different dynamic from what we've experienced in the past. Now, to help explain the different generations, the media and academia have come up with various titles to kind of describe the different generations. Personally, I don't like these labels. I think they lead to stereotyping, and they lead to certain types of discrimination around those labels. So after this slide, I'm not going to talk about those labels, but I just wanted to kind of set the scene. You often hear talk of 5 generations in the workplace, and this is the 5 generations that are being discussed. So the silent generation, so these are people that are probably in their 80s now, so probably out of the workplace, but are a reflection of what society looks like historically. Most influenced by the Great Depression, World War II, and kind of rationing. And they saw innovations in their kind of the early part of their life, such as radio and black and white TV. And the reason I say these things is because it's these cultural influences and technologies which affect the behaviors and outlooks of the different generations. So the baby boomers, as I said, they were the generation after the Second World War. Their big social influences in the early part of their life were the Cold War, the civil rights movement, sexual revolution. And they obviously saw the evolution of television into colour and the introduction of washing machines and kettles. Generation X, which is in fact, for full disclosure, where I sit, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, saw the miners' strike, the Brixton riots, but from a technology perspective, saw video cameras and CDs come into my life in those influencing years. The millennials, who are the children of the baby boomers, they're most influenced as they're growing up. They saw 9/11 and the religious tensions that followed them. They saw the austerity of the kind of noughties, but influenced by technology, email, social media, kind of Wi-Fi, which was things that previous generations hadn't experienced in their growing years. And then finally, Gen Z. These are the children of Generation X, and the generation that's just starting the workplace now. And obviously, they've grown up in a world where all they've known is iPhones and TV streaming, etc. So I think those things make a real big impact on people and their outlook on life. So I can't talk about age without talking about age discrimination. And in my own research, I found that people feel most discriminated in the workplace at the beginning and the end of their careers. So you can understand someone coming into the workplace, they're the youngest person in the workplace, everyone is older than them, and they're still finding their feet in the workplace. So you can understand that they would kind of feel that, and historically, there has been behaviors, that aren't appropriate towards apprentices, etc. So you can see that discrimination exists. The other end of the scale is people at the older end who feel kind of marginalized, not offered training, not offered promotions, etc., because they're in the latter part of their career. So if we just look at how discrimination has evolved, there was a classic piece of research in 2004 which identified very clear age discrimination, people being fired because of their age, people being excluded because of their age. And that was the precursor to the employment equality regulations, which came in 2006, which basically outlawed treating people differently in the workplace because of their age. This was followed up in 2010 by the Equality Act, which brought together all the discrimination legislation in one act. So as a result of those two acts, we saw a real decline in direct discrimination because it was illegal. And interestingly, the default retirement age, the age at which you had to retire from work, was only removed in 2011, which was, I guess, the final example of direct discrimination. Since then, I think discrimination in all areas, has evolved into stereotyping. We've all heard jokes about different cohorts of ages in the workplace not being good at this or not being good at that. And the problem with stereotyping is, one, it doesn't create a very collaborative culture. And secondly, there was a piece of research in 2016 that identified that if you tell someone that they're not very good at something, and they constantly hear that, it will impact their performance. So a culture of stereotyping and biases does impact the performance of a business, which is why we have to be, very careful and very purposeful in how we, construct the culture of a business. So, as I said, I didn't like the descriptions of the 5 generations. In my own book, I've referred to 2 cohorts of workers. And for me, the cohorts of workers are defined by their experiences growing up and their experiences in the workplace. And the big defining difference that I see in the experience of people was the introduction of the internet. The internet changed the way that we work. It changed the way that we communicated. And it led to a whole raft of new technologies, which we now have. Everyone has an iPhone in their pocket, etc. So those people that joined the workplace before the introduction of the internet, grew up in the workplace with a with a set of behaviors. At that time, set working hours, set working days, 100% in the office was the norm. And this is where this generation, kind of how they started their working life and how they've got used to working. So you would expect this older cohort to be more used in working in that way. They tend to be, because of that kind of conventional office hours, being in the office together all the time, very team orientated, but also very, very formal in the way that they organize their work, because that's the way it was through most of their career. Having been around longer, they tend to have more emotional wisdom, which actually makes older workers very good at handling customers, because they've dealt with all the challenges that customers have had in the past. Because of their life stage, they tend to stay in their jobs for longer. And again, because of the way that they started work, they tend to keep their home life and their work life very, very separate, because that's the way it was when they started work. Now, this is in contrast to a group of workers that have joined the workplace since the introduction of the internet, and the use of iPhones and social media. So all of this technology has made this cohort, much more adaptable to kind of multitasking and using different technologies and kind of engaging in different way. Also, because of the feedback that they constantly experience through their kind of growing up through social media, through their education, etc., they have an expectation of kind of more feedback around the work that they're doing. And this is very much in contrast to those that haven't grown up with that technology. Because they've grown up with this technology, they've grown up very flexible. They're not tied to the conventional office hours and the conventional use of the office. Much more happy to work anywhere. Expect much more flexibility around their work. Expect more kind of work-life balance. I think also because of their exposure to social media and exposure to global events and news, etc., this generation want more social purpose in their work, and it's something we definitely need to consider. And this generation don't separate their home and work-life balance. Everything is intertwined through technology, and they bring them wholesales to work. So as I'm sure you can guess, when you kind of look at these two kind of different perspectives on the workplace, potentially there's conflict that can come out of these different perspectives. However, just to touch on the business case, there's been a lot of research that says actually when we mix older and younger workers together, productivity goes up, innovation goes up. There's a much better work environment to be more productive, because we're combining the strengths of a broader cohort of people. They're much more able to solve problems with those different perspectives and kind of different experiences. So just want to talk about the challenges, and I'm going to give a story of kind of how this first came about for me. As I said, for the last kind of 8-9 years, I've been running a business with 200 people in. When I started that business, one of the first hires I made was someone that I'd known for 20 years, someone that I've worked with 20 years before, and I kept in contact with them. And I was keen to work with them because they'd kind of adapted to the market as the market had changed. They had a lot of experience, and I was keen to kind of bring that experience into the business. Then about 3-4 years into the business, one day I received a CV from someone on spec, like a CV I'd never seen before. It was very colourful, firstly, which kind of made it jump out on the papers on my desk. And secondly, it wasn't just a kind of catalogue of their past experience. They had kind of taken all their experience and knowledge and mapped it into into my business, and kind of made a business case as to why their experience fitted with my organization and why they would be a good hire. So I thought, well, I've got to see this person for an interview. When I interviewed them, they came with a presentation of how they could take their skill sets to help me grow the business, with a full business plan. And again, I'd never seen anything like this before. I'd never seen anyone put so much effort and research specifically into an effort to join, a company that I worked for before. So I didn't have a job for them, but I thought, this is such an impressive individual. I need to bring them in. I need to find a job for them. They joined, and they were just as good as I imagined them to be. They were. This was a woman in her 20s, but she brought a whole different perspective on the workplace, and brought a whole different perspective on different technologies and different techniques that we could use at work. So you could imagine how excited I was when the first time there was an opportunity to put these two individuals kind of working together, because I thought, well, the combination of my long-term colleague who was in his 50s and this individual who had really impressed me since I'd recruited them, the opportunity of putting them and working together, I thought was going to be great, and there was going to be great work that came out of them. However, it only took half an hour before one of them was at my office door saying, I can't work with them. They're just not listening to what I'm saying. They don't respect me. And then the other, an hour later, coming to me saying, they don't respect me. They're not listening. It's just not going to work. And I just couldn't kind of work out what the issue was, until I thought, well, the only way to solve this is to get involved in the project myself and see them working together. And what I saw was conflict between the two of them, which I linked to their different perspectives. So, for example, the younger colleague, came to the meeting, was actually kind of on their phone doing research during the meeting so that they could kind of contribute with kind of up-to-date information in the meeting. My older colleague found that annoying and rude, because he felt that they weren't listening to him when they were talking in a meeting. So just their different approach to handling meetings created conflict. So the way that I got them to work together was just to set boundaries and kind of set rules about what was an acceptable way to work when they were collaborating together, and when they were working on their work separately, how they brought that work together. And I think this was the big revelation for me, and this is what led me to write the book, Manage the Gap. So I just want to dive in now to some practical things that I found that have kind of really helped kind of manage this kind of diverse group of kind of individuals in the workplace. So firstly, I think communication is really important. We've got to get everyone kind of on the same page. And I mentioned before that my older cohort kind of kept their work and home life separate, and my younger cohort brought them whole selves to work and kind of shared. So I needed to overcome this issue. So what I did was introduce a process in project meetings or kind of company meetings, where we had a sign-in process where we went round the table and everyone had the opportunity to score their business life, their personal life, and their well-being out of 10 and explain why. Now, when I started this, my younger cohort found this quite hard, because they didn't want to talk publicly about what was going on in their personal life in the meeting. My younger cohort were very, very happy to share. But what actually happened over time was much more sharing happened. And what that meant was, if there was challenges going on in people's lives, then other people in the team knew that it was happening, and they could be more empathetic and supportive to them. And it kind of removed some of the conflict issues, just because we started the meeting with sharing. And it kind of set the tone for how the meeting was going to be, in that it was very collaborative at the outset. And I found that a really useful tool for getting the teams to kind of work together. Secondly, I found that my younger cohort had a much insatiable demand for information about what was going on in the company, what the different projects were within the company, etc. Whereas my older cohort had kind of been happy to kind of move along with their own work and had less interest in kind of what was happening at a corporate level. So I introduced a kind of company-wide town hall meeting where initially was me sharing about what was going on in the business, but it evolved. So I started inviting people from across the business onto the meeting to share what they were working. And it became a great platform for sharing across the company with news of what was going on in different areas, and for people to kind of meet each other who were working in different locations, etc. And then finally, my younger cohorts, were very happy to talk about their kind of mental health and their mental health needs. My older cohort, less so, but perhaps more needing of a mental health program. So publicly introducing a mental health program across the organization, running kind of monthly kind of workshops, was really beneficial to both cohorts and helped both cohorts understand one another's perspectives. So communication, I think, has to be at the heart of kind of managing an age diversity strategy. The next thing I found was continuous learning. That all the academic research says that people don't become less good at things because they get older. People don't become less curious because they get older. It's often because they get less opportunities to learn. So I decided to build a culture of continuous learning within the business, and often we kind of kicked off meetings with a TED talk, and then we would talk about what we would learn in the TED talk as a way of kind of having bite-sized bits of learning for everyone to do together. And again, research says that when you learn together, you have the impact of the learning is much stronger. I also found that I needed to grow my future leadership skills, but that didn't mean just my younger cohort. It could have been anyone in the business that wanted to be a leader and learn skills. So we introduced a leadership skills academy, but we opened it to everyone in the organization, not just people, postgraduates, etc. I introduced an intergenerational mentoring program so that my older cohort was matched with younger individuals. And that was really beneficial in both ways, because they were both able to learn from one another in a kind of private, personal mentoring relationship. And then finally, I found that my managers struggled the most with managing the most diverse teams, because I was getting questions from my younger managers about how do I manage older workers and kind of vice versa. So I introduced a manager network where I brought my managers together monthly, and we shared the management challenges that we had, and then collectively worked out a best practice way of doing it together. So I had the value of my younger and older managers kind of sharing their experiences and then collectively working solutions together. And that I was able to build a common culture across the business because of that. Leadership and structure of the organization, I think, is important. I found myself in a situation, because I grew my business through acquisition, that I had a exco team which was entirely of a certain age group and a certain demographic, and that presented a potential risk to me that I wasn't getting input from a broader cross section of people into that management team. So I disbanded the exco. And replaced it with a series of operating committees where I could invite a much broader, more diverse group of people to get involved in the kind of strategic and management structure of the business. So I think you need to kind of look laterally at your organization to say, just because it's structured in one way, does it have to be structured in that way? I also found you see in the research that people in their mid-career have spent their entire career going to university and then training to do their role, and they become proficient in their role at their mid-career. And at that point, people stop thinking about their career because they think, well, I've arrived at what I want to do, and they just kind of carry on doing that. But often they find then in the latter part of their career that their ambitions change and they're not necessarily in the right role. So we introduced a mid-career review where we sat down with our mid-career employees and said, well, what do you want your future to look like? Do we have roles that you might want to kind of move sideways to into the future? Do you want to work more flexibly, etc.? And that mid-career review meant that those people didn't find themselves stuck in roles that they were unhappy with in the future. And it allowed us to, create an environment where people could stay in the business longer because we'd accommodated their changing ambitions. And then finally, kind of flexibility. I think working flexibly is the cornerstone of any diversity inclusion kind of initiative. And it's the cornerstone of the culture of a modern business. So I think when you introduce an opportunity for people to work flexibly, it has to be reason neutral. It has to be because the individual wants to do it, not just because they've got young children, not just because they're returning to work after young children. There are many reasons why people want to work flexibly, and we shouldn't take that into consideration. If we are going to work flexibly, I think we have to design that flexibility into job descriptions so that people aren't left kind of, the last person in the team who's not working flexibly and picking up, all the office-based tasks. We need to think structurally about how we organize our teams and the flexibility around it. And then finally, when we're recruiting, I think we should advertise jobs as flexible because we'll find that a broader set of people will apply for roles if they know that they can work flexibly. So if you're looking at kind of good recruitment from an age perspective, I think we've all used job adverts that we've used historically for a long time, and we need to go back and look at our job adverts and make sure we're not using language that's stereotypical of a certain kind of age group that you're targeting. If you're saying you want 10 years experience, that means you're excluding a whole cohort of people that don't have 10 years experience. If you're saying you want enthusiastic, that's often kind of code for saying, well, I want someone kind of younger that will do anything that I ask them to do. So I think we need to move this stereotyping language, as I say, promote jobs as flexible. And I think we need to give greater clarity about the recruitment process. For people coming into the workplace who've never had a job before, they have no idea about what the process is going to look like, and it's much more challenging for them because of that. Equally, we might have older employees that haven't changed jobs perhaps in 20 years and never been through a recruitment process. So I think providing clarity about the process, what it's going to look like, how it's going to work, even interview questions in advance will open up a bigger cohort of people applying for roles. The same with kind of the scheduling of the interview and the organisation of the interview. And I said, I think we need to talk about flexibility in the interview process so that we do attract that broader cross section of people, and we talk to individuals about how they might be able to work in the recruitment process. So we're not surprised when someone a week into their new job applies for flexible working. I think it's much better to talk about this stuff before they're recruited. So finally, just to finish up, I just wanted to kind of a quick ad for the Centre for Aging Better. I'm a trustee for this organisation. It's a charity / think tank that was funded by the National Lottery in an effort to address age discrimination and age-related issues in our society. They have a kind of a workplace division within this organisation, and they've created an age-friendly employer pledge, and they're encouraging as many employers as possible to sign the pledge and use the logo that's at the bottom of the screen to encourage people to know that they're thinking about age in their recruitment, promotion structure of their organization. And to become an age-friendly employer, they're only asking employers to say, well, actually, this year, let's address one of these issues, and over the coming years, we'll address these issues over time. So, employers are just as important about kind of creating this, age-positive environment as the managers and the individuals in the organisation themselves. So that's the formal presentation bit that I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Steve. That was really insightful and really fascinating stuff there. So really appreciate the presentation. We will just go to questions from the audience. I just wanted to ask before that, if I may, just a question about the research degree that you did on the impact of COVID in terms of how that impacted the different generations in the workplace. Is there any more you can elaborate on with regards to
it's interesting, because there's a typical stereotype of older workers that they're not so good at technology and that they're not good at adapting to technology. And what COVID did was everyone had to move to video calling overnight when we were sent to kind of work from home on kind of laptops, etc. So regardless of age, we collectively learned together how to run meetings and how to do webinars and how to kind of do whatever we do in a collaborative way on a video call. And that collective learning meant that older cohort learned with a younger cohort together, and there was no stereotyping or discrimination around this kind of a mass adoption of new technology. So that was a real positive thing for that older cohort, which potentially, if society had moved to video calling without COVID, there was a potential for that kind of cohort to be left behind. So that was kind of one thing that came out. A couple of things which I think are probably obvious, but the working from home and flexible working that we now experience is much more beneficial to that older cohort, because they potentially already have properties with enough space to have a separate working space within it. They've already built their work network. They already know their job, so it's much easier for an older individual to move to flexible working than a younger individual, because a younger individual, potentially might be living in a one-bedroom flat with their partner, where they're both working from home and they don't have a separate kind of workspace each. Though younger individuals won't have that network of colleagues and industry network, because they're kind of new into an industry, and they haven't got the depth of experience on all the tasks that they're looking to do. So it's definitely created a challenge for the kind of younger cohort. And I don't think we've solved this yet. I think, I've watched my own children joining the workplace, and they get a laptop delivered in the post, and they spend their first week kind of at home, when they would really benefit from being in the office and building kind of closer relationships in the early stages of their new jobs. So there's a couple of things that I found out in that research.
That's really fascinating. Thanks, Steve. And I think, the COVID, the transformation, I think really resonates with a lot of people. And obviously no one could have predicted that was going to happen. And then suddenly we were all forced to work in this way.
Well, and we've all had to go, you're on mute, and laugh at one another, and that was a collective laugh that we've had. It wasn't just pointed at an individual that was doing something wrong all the time.
Yeah, brilliant. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So got one from Catherine here that says, any tips on how to manage expectations and have career conversations with colleagues of all ages around being proactive with one's learning and development and career path? How do the expectations differ?
Yeah, and it's to avoid stereotyping here, but I think this comes down to good best practice for a manager, and I think career development and training needs to be part of that monthly one-to-one conversation, because people change their minds and ambitions, and want to kind of explore things with their manager, and I think it needs to have annual objectives associated to it, which are measurable, so that the conversation about career and the conversation about training is kind of normalized, and it happens every month. It's not part of an annual appraisal when someone's disappointed that they didn't get on the training course or they didn't get the role they wanted, and they've got to wait another year until they have the next conversation. So I personally think this is about, nice, clear objective setting and regular conversations and check-ins. So, and if people are not motivated to do training and not motivated to their career, acknowledging that, but accepting that they might change their mind in the future as their circumstances change. And for those ambitious people that are kind of chasing the next promotion all the time, it's a regular conversation to go, well, okay, well, you're not quite there yet. These are the 10 things that you need to master before you're ready to kind of move to the next thing. And I'm not going to put you forward for that promotion or that training until you've mastered those 10 things. And, I think sometimes we dance around these conversations because we think they're a bit hard, but I think the transparency is best for everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve. And then we've got a question from Joanna, who asks, I find it really annoying to be called a millennial. So great that you pointed out that these labels do not always match. When you said that you split the employees based on their age, did you also look into their cultural background? I think the way and where we have been raised has a big impact on our way of working. Did you notice anything like that?
So my research and my work has always been kind of UK focused. When I did my research, I did kind of look at some other kind of demographics, but I really focused on age, because in the academic literature there'd been lots of research around kind of gender and race and sexuality, but age hadn't. So I tried in my research to focus on age, but I absolutely agree. Who we are as individuals is what shaped our lives, and we are shaped by some big events in society that you can perhaps link to age, but we're also shaped by many other things. Our social groups, our family position, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've got a question from Abid. Says one of the impacts of COVID has been that more people appear to have opted out of the workforce. Do you have any particular insights into why this has happened? And does this create a bigger challenge for the workplace if at some point older workers may want to rejoin the workforce, or is this unlikely to happen?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of data that came out of the ONS after COVID about a whole raft of people that left the workplace as a result of COVID, and the majority of those are in the 55 plus age range. And I think there was a period of time when everyone was like, well, what was this? Is this everyone retiring early? And I think now it's becoming clearer that a big chunk of that cohort was people whose health was affected, both physically and kind of mentally, and the health service hasn't been well equipped to kind of manage them and support them in the timeframes that we want. So I think we've got a cohort of people kind of waiting for support or needing support, etc. And until that's sorted, they won't be in a position to kind of return to the workplace. So I think that's kind of one impact to those people that kind of left. I think there's not a COVID related issue. I think this is more societal, but historically, and these are people older than myself who have had their working life with a defined benefit pension, have found themselves in their kind of late 50s with the ability to retire very comfortably. Now, obviously, defined benefit pensions are not as dominant now, and we've all moved to defined contribution pensions, which means that the next cohort of people coming through don't have as much saved into their pensions. So they will have to work longer or work part-time or whatever to supplement their kind of working. So I think, historically there's been a kind of late 50s, early 60s unofficial retirement going on. But I think, the cost of living and the change in structure of pensions means that people will have to work till 67 and beyond. And as employers, we've got the smaller cohorts of people coming into the workplace. So if we're going to meet our requirements, we are going to have to work to keep all cohorts in the workplace. So we're going to have to think about the structure of our working patterns, the culture of our organizations, benefits, etc., to make sure they support all cohorts. Sometimes I speak to technology companies, and everyone in the room is under 35, and there's no, and it's considered to be positive. And I think that's kind of a little short-sighted. There are benefits in kind of mixing diversity in all ways, but specifically for this conversation around age.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got another question from Laura. It says, did the research cover preferences for internal communications and engagement for building a cohesive workforce team atmosphere? Are there any trends or patterns that can be found for the different generations, or is it more of a personal thing based on other parameters?
I think my research didn't cover that, but my observation is, if you've got a generation of people that have grown up from day one with a mobile phone in their hand, which has social media channels, work channels, email channels, TV streaming on it, that, as I kind of mentioned, that individual is much more adept at kind of communicating across multiple channels, whereas perhaps a cohort that has grown up without that technology has a preference for a single channel, and they might prefer just communicating with email, or just communicating with Teams, or just communicating using Slack or whatever. But it's that younger cohort that are more comfortable blending the kind of multiple channels. And I think sometimes that can cause conflict in work, because people are using some people are using multiple channels and some people aren't. So I think when it comes down to management, it's just being clear for this team. Our preferred channel for this type of communication is Teams. Our preferred communication for this is face-to-face meetings, and our preferred channel for that is email. And just almost having a kind of rules of engagement for the team as to how we communicate removes any issues around what's right or wrong.
Brilliant. Got a question from Ilan. In your research, were you able to look at the intersection between gender and age? If so, is there a high-level overview you could give? I know we touched on this earlier, but is there anything further?
I did. For my pilot study, I specifically looked at the relationship between gender and age, and this is not good reading. So for men, they feel most discriminated against, as I said, at the beginning and the end of their careers. For women, the feeling is that discrimination is consistent throughout their entire career, and they don't see this kind of peaks at the end. There are many gender challenges in the workplace, and I think some of them are age related, but there's sufficient age related things across women's entire careers that there aren't positive periods, or there hasn't been. But that's a whole subject in itself, so we haven't got time. But yeah, I think it's I think gender's on the diversity and inclusion conversation, it's getting a lot of profile, but we've got a long way to go to fix some of the historical issues that we've had.
See, yeah. Okay, we've got another question from says, what advice will you give to someone who's trying to have a career but feels limited and unsupported by the department because of age, and sees there is more support for the young but believes they have a wealth of experience? Everything seems to be tailored towards writing great competencies.
Yeah, I mean, this is historical. You know, if I go back to my ONS chart on the first slide, historically, when it was a pyramid, if you were kind of building a business, it was all about attracting young people into the organization. So it was all about graduate training schemes and promotions for kind of younger workers. That's not the case anymore. So I think as organizations, we need to appreciate that and reorganize ourselves as such. You know, it's not all about training people up to a role and then just ignoring them. So I think, you know, midlife reviews, you know, training opportunities and promotional opportunities for all age groups are important. Now, sometimes the reason that an older group is excluded is because the hiring manager is uncomfortable themselves with having an older team. So that comes down to kind of management training to kind of help people kind of manage that situation. And in fact, myself personally, when I was 28, I had a team of 8, and everyone was older than me. And at the time, I thought everyone was after my job. I thought everyone was criticizing what I was doing. I now realize that with experience, that they weren't after my job. They didn't want to be the manager, otherwise they would have got the job as the manager. So I think that's something that managers need to, you know, younger managers need to kind of appreciate and need support on. So back to the original question, I think this is a big issue that the whole organisation needs to think about, and I think it starts with talking with the management around you.
Thanks, Steve. I've got a question actually from Joe, our OD director, who's here with me.
Hi.
Meeting room.
Hi.
I would like to look in the camera, actually. I'll just look at you here. Thanks, Steve. Really, really fascinating, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to get you for this session. I know lots of people are going to be watching it afterwards as well. For me, I'm really interested in, I think my sense is we've come some way in supporting parents in the workplace with, you know, with their children. You know, it's changed enormously since my day, when you sort of basically couldn't even admit that you had a child, let alone sort of say, well, I need to leave early for, you know, a sports day, or they're unwell, I'm going to be late in, or I'm not going to be in at all. I suppose just sort of thinking it's sort of, you know, perhaps, you know, those people in the workplace who've got caring responsibilities, sort of thinking it's sort of the other end of the spectrum, you know, with sort of parents who might be ill. You know, we've got a growing dementia and Alzheimer's population, as well as other sort of, you know, older sort of, you know, people's illnesses. What I don't see so much of in the workplace is that sort of chat around, I need to go early because I've got an appointment to help my parents or an elderly relative, in the way that we're hearing it, you know, sort of it's become, thankfully, you know, really sort of quite commonplace to say I need to go early because of, as I said, you know, sort of sports day or whatever it is. And that's very much accepted these days. And I wonder if the next kind of hurdle to get over, and I wonder what your sort of thoughts were on this, then the next hurdle is to have those sorts of conversations in the workplace. You know, I need to go because, I don't know, social work is coming to see my parents over a care needs assessment or something like that. We just don't tend to hear that so much. And whether that's your sort of in your research or in working in other organisations, that's sort of starting to come through a little bit more now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was implied in my comment about working flexibly needs to be reason neutral. It's not just about people with small children. You know, it equally applies to you know, an older worker with elderly parents. And if you're doing that, it equally applies to a 21-year-old who might have another reason to leave. It should, you know, if productivity is right and we're delivering what we're required, and we think flexibility is the right thing, then it has to be reason neutral. So I think that's a cornerstone. Then it's about the conversation. And again, as I said, this cohort who perhaps have older workers are not ones most likely to talk about this in the workplace. They'll keep it separate because, you know, they're just not used to sharing in that way. And in fact, when I introduced the sign-in process in my own organization, in the first couple of weeks, I had an individual in their 50s who, when it asked to score his personal life out of 10, gave it a 2. And I thought, and I actually turned around and said, goodness me, what's going on? You know, I'm really sorry. There must be something terrible in your life. And he said, well, no, I just moved my mum into a care home this weekend. And there was a bit of a gasp around the room because he'd not mentioned it to anyone, even his closest colleagues. And in fact, a younger colleague had been a little irritated with him because he'd disappeared on Friday afternoon. And the younger colleague wanted some flexibility midweek and was told no. So it was the sharing of that story that gave the younger individual the kind of the gravitas of his situation and empathy with his situation, and the sign-in encouraged him to share it. Otherwise, he never would have done that. So I think a lot of things I've spoken about, it's a mixture of it all. You know, it's about flexibility, it's about communication, it's about management styles, and it's about structure of the organisation.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve. I think that's all we have time for. So that's been really interesting, really fascinating. Some great questions there from our participants. And as I said at the start, if you want to know more on this topic, then please grab a copy of Steve's book. I'll show it again, Manage the Gap. Okay, and the other one, which is the Midlife Review. So highly recommend those books. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you very much, Steve, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge on the subject. I think this is going to continue evolving, and people are going to continue to talk about this topic, and hopefully we'll have you back at some point. And yeah, it's been a great session. So thank you very much.